It's okay to feel like you're not good enough. It's okay to question whether or not you have the skills, the knowledge, the expertise to be able to accomplish what it is you're trying to accomplish, because everybody else around you is feeling exactly the same way. You don't have to be exceptional to accomplish exceptional things.
Welcome to the Empowered Life Podcast, a space dedicated to one belief that you have the power within to create everything you seek. So if you are ready to step into a new kind of higher learning, the kind that leads to true personal freedom, hang here with me. I'm your host, Rudi Riekstins, and this is the Empowered Life. Welcome to the Empowered Life Podcast. My name is Rudi Riekstins, and today's guest is Andy Stumpf. He is a retired Navy SEAL, former SEAL Team 5 and 6 operator, combat veteran, speaker, entrepreneur, and the host of the Cleared Hot podcast. Andy spent 17 years in the SEALs team, surviving being shot at close range with an AK. I mean, that was during combat. Since has dedicated his life, his conversations all around leadership, resilience, and responsibility, and what it actually means to keep moving forward when life puts you under pressure, which is why I mentioned being shot at close range with an AK and still being able to get yourself back to fully functioning, let alone doing it at an exceptionally high level. He is the author of the best-selling book, Drownproof, which is 8 life lessons to keep your head above water. It is a raw and practical guide on discipline, fear, leadership, and navigating life's hardest moments without losing yourself in the process. Andy, the Empowered Life podcast is all about we being prepared and qualified for who we get to become, just talking about what you've done to get you to where you are today. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast and to share your incredible wealth. Thank you for joining us in the Empowered Life podcast today, brother.
Of course, I hope I can live up to that intro. It seems like a lot in totality. Those were all small slices at a time placed on top of each other that I guess turned into something, but I can't say that I had an architectural desire or design where my life was going to go. It's just where it led me.
I believe that there is an architectural design, and we were created by this incredible force that has so perfectly and beautifully planned every moment that nothing is ever an accident. It's always divinely orchestrated. I love that when I search you online and I'm trying to get a feel for who you are as the man that's not just represented in the book, people describe you, and I'm quoting now, as the most interesting man on the internet right now. And I was like, that's interesting. And I was like, tell me more.
Don't believe everything you hear on the internet.
So many of the things that came up were speaking into your humility and that you are just a good guy and you are who you are and you show up, you do what you say you're going to do. And I think that is missing. And what I love is that in the very beginning of this, you've already deflected and been like, well, I just took some steps. But I think that your life has achieved all of what you've done. And we didn't even talk about you jumping out of planes in a wingsuit. We didn't talk about you getting 4 world records. You've done so much, but it is from the action of taking one step in front of the other. And so many people fail to take those steps. So my first opening question for you is, why do you think so many people don't take steps?
It's a great question. And I'll answer it via the most rewarding 18 months of my military career, which was assigned to a duty station as a BUDS instructor. And for people who don't know what that is the initial 6-month training pipeline to become a SEAL. It's the origin story for anybody, officer or enlisted, who wants to go into that pathway. And I got assigned there in 2006, which was in the middle of the global war on terror, from a command on the East Coast. This was after I had gotten shot. This is where I went to rehab, where at the previous command, I was operating at the level that I actually probably wasn't even able to imagine pre-military service, with people more capable than I could describe, with more support that I could fathom. And then I was told I was going to go teach students. And I didn't want to be there. I thought I was going to hate it. It is and remains the most impactful and insightful 18 months of my 17-year military career, far more so than any combat operations, because I got to see the answer to that question. And more importantly, I got to talk with people in moments that they probably would never want to share with others, because they'll live their life largely, and this is me repeating what I heard them say, with a sense of regret for the decision that they had made. And that was to give up on their lifelong goal, which is a slightly different version of the question that you asked, but the answer is the same. Why don't people take those steps? Or why do people give up at the beginning of a journey as opposed to seeing it through? And the answer I got after talking to hundreds, if not thousands of students who had just surrendered their, what they would tell you was their lifelong goal, and that there was nothing instructors were going to be able to do to get them to quit, and that they were going to be there on graduation day. Absolutely. They would bet every penny of their net worth on it. And they had just quit. And time and time and time again, they said to me the same thing. They became overwhelmed by the totality of the goal that they were trying to accomplish. And instead of focusing on the next step, they could only see the distance between where they were and where their goal was. And they started living in that macro space. And we've all felt this when you're tired or hungry or physically in pain. You start asking yourself these questions. How long can I feel like this for? And that's a dangerous place, because your emotions can start overriding your decision-making process. And that's exactly what happens to these students. And they end up quitting. Being overwhelmed is the long-winded way to describe the answer is people can often identify their goal. They don't know how to get started, and they're overwhelmed by what it would take to succeed. So they choose not to.
I used you as an example today. I was doing a 2-hour training for a group, and there was a lady that at one point weighed 350 pounds. And today she's sitting at about 180, 190 pounds. And it took her 15 years to start to lose the weight. And then she lost it in a short amount of time, obviously changed pattern or behavior. And obviously, me just preparing for this interview and getting the opportunity to have you on the podcast, I've just been diving into you and your world. And somewhere you were quoted just saying that you've got into the mindset of controlling what you can control and taking the steps that you can take in that moment. And I had said to her, your life, looking at and I just mentioned your accolades. And I was like, all of what he achieved was because he did something difficult and then did it again and just compounded. And that when we look back, the thing that we thought was difficult wasn't actually difficult at all. And she had tears in her eyes and she said, you know what, that is exactly what I did. Like when I thought about the whole goal of losing weight, I couldn't do it. But when I thought about, can I walk on a treadmill today? Can I do that? And then she did that and she was able to do it, which I think is so beautiful. Everyone that's listening to this has a dream, goal, or desire. And the majority of people that I come into business with, that you and your company, because you're impacting people in leadership and in business, as all of what you've learned in the military translates into corporate. And I love that you're bringing that into these spaces, is that most people have the dream, but they don't achieve the dream because they don't take the action, and there's something that's holding them back from being able to do it. And I think that that's such a necessary conversation, and you've beautifully articulated it's just taking a step and taking another one and taking another one. But I want to pivot slightly, because when I was reading all of what you've done, there was one burning question I really had for you. And if it's the only question, I think it's the best one we could do in the episode today. And that is, in your book, you talk about it. On your website, on your landing page, you talk about you wanted to be a SEAL, and you wanted to do this from such a young age, 13, I believe, 12 or 13, and 11. So, I mean, just to have that clarity at 11 years old, and then to take the steps to be able to do it. And then you didn't just become a SEAL, you went to SEAL Team 5, and then years later, SEAL Team 6. And I mean, you're talking about the very best in the world at what you do. And that is operating at the highest level. And then you retire. And it's like, how do you define who you are? Because so many people want to achieve something and they never get it. But when you achieve it and then that ends, how do you reconcile who you are and how you show up?
It's a complicated answer because it's a sliding scale depending on how much of people's identity they place on what they do versus who they are. When people ask me who I am a husband and a father. Everything that you have mentioned in the intro are things that I have done, but they are never things that I have measured myself by as a man or derived value as who I consider myself to be as a person. I constantly reminded myself that what I do is not who I am. And that can be difficult. In the modern era, the term Navy SEAL is very, very recognizable. It was not like that when I joined the military in 1996. There were people who knew about it and wanted to go down that path, but it was before, I will say, the explosion of information and public accolades that are associated with it. And anybody that tells you that those things, the public nature of it and the fact that it can open doors, whether or not you're qualified to walk through them or not is a different discussion to have. But anybody that would tell you that those things aren't enticing is lying directly to your face. But you have to guard yourself against that. The people that I know who have struggled the most post any career, and I could say this is across first responders. You know what? I'm going to say it across, it doesn't even matter the business sector that you come from. Those that struggle the most when they have to metaphorically or physically put a uniform, and maybe it's a suit and tie, away in their closet and move on with their life, the ones that seem to struggle the most are the ones that placed supreme value or their identity in what that was. Because when you hang it up, which you're going to have to, regardless of who you are and what you do for a living, what you're going to be left with is a void that nobody and nothing can fill except for yourself. So I tried to, earlier on and always throughout my career, remind myself that it was going to end and to try to maintain a healthy tug of war with that enticement of the public things or the things that you could get from it and not latch my identity to that occupation. And I think that that helped. What was harder was losing a sense of purpose, because the job that I came from, if you had a good day or a bad day, you might make national news, depending on how that went for you. But the nation would call upon you to do some pretty exceptional things at times. And when the phone stops ringing and that sense of purpose goes away, not identity, but the ability to actually impact the world around you and to the degree that you thought you would be able to goes away, the purpose was harder for me than the identity. And it is through things like hosting my own podcast or writing the book or coming to the realization later in life that I don't know how I'm going to do it or what the title will be, but I want to try to improve the world around me and be a net positive, a value add to the world around me. I don't care about the prescription of what that looks like, but that is my purpose moving forward. And when I found that, it helped fill that void for me.
I love that you said that, because one of the questions I have for you is, what do you believe is your purpose? Because so many
That's it.
people have an idea that they want to do something and they think
Yep.
that when they achieve that, they'll eventually be enough. And you've done so many things. And I was just curious that all of what was your life experience, what is it all for? Because there's always, as we started saying at the beginning, I believe this tapestry, and we're being prepared or qualified for who we get to become. It's no surprise to me that you're a sought after keynote speaker. It's no surprise to me that you have a company teaching high level leadership skills to businesses, because it's the same practices and principles. And I just love that you answered that without even the need for the question.
The things, skydiving, the wingsuit stuff behind me in the picture, I don't know the things that may interest me in my life or that moving forward that I haven't done yet, or opportunities that will present themselves. But I do know that I view almost all opportunities now through the lens of, does this serve the purpose of trying to be a value add? And that has been incredibly helpful for me. And that way it reduces the burden a little bit. It doesn't have to be incredibly prescriptive. I have to do this, 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 and this. It's like, I don't know what's going to present itself to me, but that will be my North Star. And it really has helped. It's actually removed a lot of the burden from me, because I know the impact I want to have. I'm not sure how I'm going to get there. And I'm old enough now and have enough reps that I realize I'm okay with that. I'm going to figure it out.
You spoke a moment ago about what people gain by becoming a Navy SEAL and the doors that it opens. I'm
Mhm.
curious, what did it cost you in a way like that people have never really asked you? Because I would imagine that came at unbelievable cost.
Military service, there's a difference. Well, in many things, not just military service. There's a difference between the price and the cost. The price of military service is pretty straightforward. I mean, you sign a contract, you obligate to a certain amount of time. The career field that I went down, I had a rough understanding pre 9/11 of what that was going to look like, and certainly understood what it was going to look like as I reenlisted after 9/11. The cost, which I didn't realize at the time, was actually carried more by my family and the people that cared about me. I was so busy. I mean, I did 2 years of being gone and overseas 270 days a year, and then 2 years back to back, by the way, the two at 270 and then the two at over 300 plus. It was a 4 year stretch. And during that time period, I had two children as well, and a mother and father that I didn't realize how much worry would be the light word that I would use for it. Perhaps crushing and crippling anxiety would be the word that they would use. You'd have to ask them on that. But I was so busy and so focused on trying to be a master of what it is that I did, so I could come back and hopefully one day put more effort in to be the husband and father that I wanted to be, that it was actually carried more by others than myself. And it's tough. A lot of people talk about their experiences in the military. Post-traumatic stress is a real thing. I've been around or exposed to more violence than most people, I think, would ever want to be exposed to. But I also don't believe that those things have to break you. I think I'm a better version of myself because of the experiences that I've had. I know post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder, they definitely dominate the airwaves. And there's this broken toy narrative of soldiers that are traumatized and broken by the trauma that they experience. And don't get me wrong, it's trauma for sure. But post-traumatic growth is what I have focused on since then. I think my experiences, the decisions that I was put in a place to make with very limited information and then can spend the rest of my life wondering whether or not I did the right thing, those, they don't have to destroy you. I think it actually has made me somebody who can love more. I think it's made me somebody who can appreciate more, who values the smaller things perhaps more, and can appreciate the world that I live in, because I've seen the other side of that, where people on their best day would be falling far short of most Americans on their worst day here. But again, price versus cost. I'm on my second marriage. And I'm not going to say that's all associated with my military service. It's not causal, but it was corollary for sure. I lost a lot of time with my children, years away from them. I've reconnected and they were younger at that time period. So it was easier to self-justify, and their processing ability was not what it is now. I'm glad I have more time with them as they've grown into young men and women. But it's really the family cost. It's the people that care about you who can't impact in any way the outcome and are crushed by their inability to escape, I would say, largely the dread associated with the job you had.
One of the comments that I had read about you is how articulate you are and thoughtful in your messaging. And I love that, because that to me is one of the greatest skill sets in leadership, is somebody who really carefully communicates his position. And I can see that you really think about how you're answering something so that it can impact someone, because I've never been in the military, so I could not put myself in your shoes. I can read all the books that I want that gives me all of the setting, but to not have lived it, I can't have that vantage point. Yet you're able to communicate in a way that brings me along with that journey, that I can gain the lesson from the experience without having gone through the lesson itself. You wrote a book and it has come out, and it is already, it debuted as a New York Times best-selling book. It is, for authors, the greatest accolade and achievement. And you achieved it, and it seems effortless. And what I mean is not the effort before.
I get it. I know what you're saying. Yeah.
To come out and immediately have that level of success. And I just want to say to you, given the opportunity I have to have your undivided attention right now, I think that the reason why you are so profoundly successful in this space, I'm not talking about what you did before, because that was you putting one foot in front of the other. But you can put one foot in front of the other. You can write the book, you can publish it, and it doesn't mean it's going to do anything. And I think the reason that your book has been so well received, why it is the number one selling book right now, why it is a New York Times best-selling book, why it is blowing up to the degree that it's blowing up to, is because you speak truth. And people resonate with truth. And when they hear truth, they recognize it. And it's because we're all looking for information. We're all wanting to understand or know ourselves better and to be able to learn through it. And at every turn, you've done it beautifully, where you speak into, I did this, I questioned this, I've done the best I can, what can I do differently? And this is what it cost me, and this is what I'm doing today. And as you're responding to everything, it's very thoughtful. You're giving information, but it's not information for just you. It's helping everyone along the journey, even for those of us who have never been in the military and have never lived the life experience that you've lived. I would love for you to do everyone that's listening a favor and tie for us, if you could. This is a tough ask, but I would love to know from your vantage point, What are some of the parallels that you see from the military life versus what you see in today's day and age who are not in the military, who's in business, so that it kind of
Yeah.
helps support why your book became so successful so fast?
People may not believe me when I say this. If you remove the kinetic nature, and we'll call it the risk to life limit eyesight that is associated with a very narrow bandwidth of the execution of the job. I mean, clearly, I would hope if you're working at IBM, you are not at risk of stepping on a landmine. If you are, I need you to let me know so I can get a hold of OSHA and I'm going to help you. I'm going to report the business that you work for so we can get you a safer work environment. Okay. But the military, of course, has an additional degree of risk depending on the career field that you take inside of the military. But outside of that, outside of actually the actions on an objective, on a military target, the challenges of military life, or even planning for and executing military operations, and the challenges of everyday life, in air quotes, or business life, are separated by degree, not kind. They are identical. You have the same interpersonal struggles of the teams that you are working with. You struggle to set goals or objectives that may seem as if they are outside of your ability to reach. And then you plan, you rehearse, you execute, conduct an after action, and then do it again ad nauseum. And that doesn't matter what business sector you're in. If you think about it, that's largely the repetitive cycle of both business and military operations. There's challenges in managing individuals on teams as from a leadership level, meeting people where they are at, getting people to be bought in, being clear and concise in your guidance, the way that you transmit information, the way that you talk about a military objective versus a business objective, or the key tenets of your organization or the key tenets of your family. The overlap is tremendous. And again, of course, just to reaffirm, I'm not talking about the tactical aspect of that. Of course, that is very unique. But people in the military, and I have to narrow that down even further and say people from the community that I came from, because that's the only experience that I have. I don't actually know a whole lot about the traditional military because the special operations community is very different in many ways than service in the conventional military. But in that world, you have people who it is their job, essentially. I was having this conversation yesterday. Special operations is nonlinear problem solving. You are presented with problems, you find solutions. That is exactly what a relationship looks like with a significant other. That is what parenting looks like. That is what day one through your last day in your professional career is going to look like. Now, sometimes people will present you problems and you have to solve them, and other times you're going to be out there finding them for yourself. But it's taking these tools that were reinforced to a very high degree in the military, and then you can apply them across the broad spectrum of personal and professional adversity that you may face in the civilian world. And people, they want to separate those two worlds, but I'm here to tell you the overlap, the Venn diagram overlap is tremendous. It's a different angle that you're looking at it from. And hopefully that answered your question.
It absolutely did. And I'm thinking of how do we take this deeper? Because what I'm really wanting is to implore everyone that's listening to this to grab a copy of your book. And I'm selfishly, selflessly, or selfishly plugging your book for you, but you've already hit the bestsellers list. So I want the audience to know it's for no other reason than their benefit. And my selfless push of it is to serve them. You named your book Drownproof.
Mhm.
And there's a military understanding of that. And I want you to speak into what is the exercise, but why did you name your book that, knowing you weren't writing a book for the military? Because so
Yeah.
much of that is about self-control, panic management, etc.,
Yeah.
and stamina. And I think that is part of that truth that we were referring to that is the audience is so ready for.
So I'll answer in reverse. I'll talk about the evolution last because when I explain it to you, you're not going to be nearly as impressed as you might think the evolution actually sounds like. The reason I wrote the book, when people find out about my military experience, which I don't lead with, I actually play a game with myself. And when I go out with my wife, I play a game of how long can I actually talk with other people before saying a single thing about myself, or they find out that I used to be in the military. Because if they find out I used to be in the military, what do you think that they want to talk about? They want to talk about what's it like when things are blowing up and whizzing past your head. And I understand why they want to talk about that, because that's most commonly what is shown in media, whether you find it on your phone or an IMAX TV screen. In those conversations, it is almost always that people will say, wow, those experiences seem so unique, and I'm never going to be able to have them. And they must have been so impactful for you. And the last part of that is incredibly correct. They have been impactful for me. They have allowed me, and they are the tools that I use to navigate my personal and professional life. I suppose statistically, they might be out of reach for those people as well, because not many people go down the career path that I wanted to go down. So from a mathematical perspective, yes, I guess they're correct. But the emphasis for the book was, it came from the realization that if I was on my deathbed and I realized that I had used these tools and had these experiences, and the only thing that I did with them was to try to navigate my way through my own life, I would be filled with regret, because you don't have to have experienced these combat exposures, which is a lot of what people want to know about. And the reason why people pay so much attention to the tools and the techniques is because they allow you to stay alive in that environment, which doesn't mean they can't be applied in a non-combat environment. It actually means they might be equally, if not more effective, because the consequences are less and you're probably going to have more time. But I wanted to take the experiences that I had and give them to people in the best way that I could try to describe them, so they could, not having had those experiences, take the lessons learned from them and apply them in their life, however they wanted to. I wrote 8. It's 8 life lessons. It could have been 30. I tried to keep it at, I don't know how well a book would sell if it was 5 times the size and said 45 lessons to life. People would be like, okay, that's a little bit too much, buddy. So kept it at 8. People, my goal would be, if you find one that sticks with you, that's awesome. And I try to give real life experiences of how I've used all of them, specifically post-military life. But so that's where the desire came from to write the book. I called it Drownproof because we live in a world where success and excess is oftentimes promoted and celebrated, in my opinion. If you go to Instagram, and I'm not saying this pejoratively, but if you go to Instagram, it's mostly people posting great moments. They're wave tops, if you will, or mountain peaks, which are interesting, and I can appreciate that. But to me, what is fascinating is the journey between mountaintop to mountaintop and the valley that most of us have to go through. And you're not going to get to a mountaintop by accident. The first thing you have to know how to do is survive. And in the water, which is, in my opinion, the least hospitable medium on Earth. You know, it can determine when you can breathe. It can kill you via temperature and exposure. Olympic swimmers, people who win gold medals, where did they start? By learning how to stay alive in the water. And so it comes from my idea, at least, that before thriving, which I hope that everybody does, you need to be able to survive. And so that's where the term Drownproof came from. Now, the evolution itself, there's a picture of the evolution on the cover of the book, which when I showed that to the editors, they told me this afterwards, after it had gotten published. There was a huge internal argument at St. Martin's Press. They were worried that the cover photo was going to scare people. And half of them thought that was a bad idea. The other half thought it was fantastic. So the fantastic half, actually, they won. They involved me in none of this. They told me about this afterwards when I was sitting at their office. But it's a picture of people in a pool who have their feet tied together and their hands are tied behind their back, and they are bobbing up and down. I think it's a 15-foot pool. And for an hour, you bob, you exhale to become negatively buoyant. You go to the bottom, you push off the bottom, you come to the surface, big breath of air, and you start exhaling. It isn't really that challenging of an evolution if you are comfortable in the water. And for an hour, you can only hear the instructors yelling at you while your head is above water to get a nice gasp of air. And then you're just back down. So you hear yourself exhaling. It's actually quite peaceful. Again, if you're comfortable in the water. At the end of that hour, you have to traverse the pool. So you swim in a dolphin-like fashion. And when you're doing this, you're trying to keep the air in your lungs so you can maintain your positive buoyancy. You come back and forth, you start bobbing again. A student will throw a mask out in front of you. At this point, I don't know why they do this in the evolution, but they have to pick up the mask with their teeth, bob for a few more bobs, Then they're given the okay. Then they have to do a somersault in the water for some reason. Again, I don't know why. And then the evolution is over. And that is what is considered the drownproofing evolution in buds. It has nothing to do with your ability to not be able to be killed in the water or the medium that covers 75% of the Earth's surface. There have been seals who have died recently, actually, who have drowned in the Persian Gulf. It's not about being drown proof. It's about self-control and an environment that doesn't care about you or your dreams or your desires, which in my description at least accurately describes the life that we all navigate. It's about self-control. And also, and to let people know, the first time they do this, we don't just throw caution to the wind. There's a 1-to-1 ratio. So for every student in the picture, there's another student on the pool deck that is watching specifically that student. There are a bunch of instructors that are in the water. They just weren't pictured in that photo. And the very first time they do this, we just tell them to put their hands behind their back and keep their feet together. And then we slowly practice that. And then we'll Velcro strap their feet together, but they can still use their hands. We titrate our way to that test. We're not trying to set people up for the unaccomplishable. It's a very crawl, walk, run process. But again, it speaks to even that self-control, regardless of what is going on in the world around you. That is one of the key tenets to being able to survive, regardless of what is happening, with the hopes that you can survive long enough to build momentum towards that thrive, whatever that may be for you.
I love that while you were giving us that explanation, and you set it up so beautifully, you said you found it was more peaceful when
Yeah.
you were in the water than when you were being screamed at above. And I think that's the point of the whole exercise. And I'm only repeating this for the benefit of the audience so that we really understand what you're sharing, is that we're going to be put in situations or circumstances in life, but at the end of the day, we have a choice and we get to choose how to react. And if you condition yourself in an otherwise uncomfortable situation to find the peace, to find the quiet, to find the reprieve, you can handle a little bit of the noise. And it's about the consistency of what it is you're doing at that time. And when you find yourself in a really difficult situation in the future and you're in the Gulf, well, you've got so much conditioning that supports you that this now is not a problem. I'm now only dealing with that one thing. Now, this is obviously tied for people who are going through BUDS training and anybody who's just a diehard fan who wants to, but how do we translate this into business? I would be super curious to find, how do you think we, in a business or leadership environment where we're responsible for people, how do we simulate something where we're not physically putting them into a pool to get everyone to have that same skill set?
It's definitely achievable. If you look at the evolution and you hit it on the head, it is about controlling yourself when you're in an environment that you really can't control, which, I mean, I know you used the term entrepreneur when you were doing your intro. I don't know how good of an entrepreneur I am, but in my entrepreneurial journey, what I have determined is I can't control very much. I can't really control the environmental conditions. I can't control what's going on in the world. I can present what I think is an amazing product, but I can't control whether or not other people agree with those things. So in the business world, I see this all the time when I'm organizing events with brands, and we'll talk about, what would you like me to speak about? And they'll start talking about oftentimes their competition. And the competition is doing this, and the competition is doing that, and the competition is making this move. And I'll ask them, those things are great, but what are you guys doing? It's like playing chess, but all you're doing is looking at the other side of the board. When the reality is the most important side of the board is the one that is the closest to you. And focusing only on your enemy and losing sight of where your people are is a surefire recipe for disaster. You cannot maneuver unless you know where everyone is. The single most important piece of information in a combat environment is this: where am I? Then it's where are my people? Then it is where is my enemy? And business gets this backwards all the time. They focus on the competition and what the competition is doing. Where this exercise, what you're talking about, to bring this back to answer the question, is there are constraints in business that you guys don't have 6 months like we did to throw people into a pool for hours. It would be amazing if a business wants to try this. I would volunteer my services for free to be your consigliere into this world. But the problem is business moves at the speed of business. The military has the ability to use these tools to train people for future events. I have yet to meet a business that has a dedicated 6 months onboarding program. Sometimes you're lucky to get 6 days. So I understand that. But you can and you should set up situational based training if you can, and throw information at people, information that doesn't matter. And your goal is to get them to pay attention to that information as opposed to the information that actually matters or things that they can actually control. And you drive it towards failure. You do an after action at the end of this. And this could be an upcoming merger. This could be a trade. This could be something that you're looking at doing. And it can help. There's a leadership role in this, and then there's the role of the team as well. And this exercise can be utilized for both of those things. But if you can drive it towards a point of failure, and let me clarify, I don't agree with training where failure is the end state itself for no purpose. But if you can highlight, let's say, perhaps focusing on only the chess pieces across the board as opposed to your own, stop and say, listen, this is why we failed. What we need to be focusing on is where are you? Where is your team? And then where is our competition? Bringing this back into the person with their feet and legs, or their legs and their arms tied behind their back. What can we control? You're focusing on our competition, which we cannot. So perhaps we apply less bandwidth to that and more bandwidth to the things that we can control, whether it's your own type of industry you're in, the own mechanisms of your industry, your own supply chain, all of those things. It's a reinforcement and a recognition that that internal focus is actually more powerful than the external. And that can be practiced often, but it really varies inside of these organizations that I work with on how much time they want to provide for these training environments. The more training that you can do, the more of these scenario-based trainings that you can do, the better off the performance is, because it highlights the danger. As opposed to controlling your breath, you're focusing on all the water around you, and that doesn't help you.
Gosh, I mean, I know I have a lot of people who are leaders of people, and I can only imagine how much they're taking away from all of what you're saying, because it is so translatable in life, in business, in a relationship, etc. And I love to reference things that people already know, but get them to look at it differently. And one of those statements that jumped out at me is God gave us free will. And I think that what that means is that we have a choice in any moment as to what we're going to do, what we're going to think about, how we're going to react, how we're going to respond. And when we experience anything, it's just giving us another vantage point. You literally said it in your beginning today. And then you get to decide afterwards, am I going to repeat that if that ever happens again? And then we learn, we grow, we evolve. And we eventually get to a point where we say, man, I want to turn around and teach what I know. And it doesn't mean we're all going to be New York Times bestselling authors, which will be wonderful, but it's about in our immediate environment. So in your company meeting tomorrow, in traffic, in any situation, how are you going to respond? And could you respond better? I'm super curious, what would your one wish, dream, or desire be for whoever is reading your book? That is the one thing that they walk away with. I don't necessarily mean one tool or one action, but if when you sat and wrote that for somebody, what was the one thing you wanted them to ultimately adopt or shift their perspective in?
I'll say there's two things here. Maybe the most impactful is this, though. Whatever it is that you're going through and whatever it is that you think that you are struggling through alone, only you are telling yourself that. You are not alone. You're not dealing with something that nobody else has. You're not facing a challenge that people won't understand. And I assure you, you are surrounded by people who, if you were to ask, they would do everything they could to help you. And a lot of that comes, it's twofold. On Friday episodes of my podcast, I started answering just Q&A years ago because the volume of questions that I got was not only humbling, because it's fascinating that somebody would be comfortable enough, or maybe there's a little bit more comfort because I'm an anonymous person and I don't know the person that they're asking, but to ask me questions about what I think about things or how to work through very difficult situations. But the underlying current in so many of these messages is, I don't think anybody's dealing with this. I feel isolated and alone. And the statistics of the community that I come from are horrible. The Green Beret community just recently crossed a lexicon that I don't think anybody even considered to be possible. And that is, they've lost more members to suicide than combat operations. And I don't know where the SEAL team sits on that spectrum, but I assure you we are much closer to that than we are the combat deaths. And at some point we will cross that. And these are just absolute specimens of people. And I unfortunately have known, I don't want to say countless, but it's getting to that point. And the resounding feeling when they did leave things behind was that of isolation, not wanting to be a burden to others, and feeling like nobody would understand if they were to share how they were feeling. And that's just not true. So that, if they take nothing from the book, it would be that. That's a little bit of a downer. So maybe we can go on the other side of this now and go with a little bit more positive. What I want, and the reason I opened the first chapter the way that I did, so that a pin you are awarded when you become a SEAL is called your Trident. Well, I lost mine 6 weeks after I had earned it because I had a really poor expression of judgment combined with alcohol, combined with being the junior man in a group of senior personnel. And I thought they were living gods and I would have done anything that they asked me to do. And that's a long way of saying is I surrendered my agency to the environment that I was in. I no longer started thinking of myself or hadn't thought of myself as a leader at that point because I was too junior, too inexperienced, too young, fill in the blank, whatever excuse you may want to use. And that's what those are. Those are excuses. You may not be in a leadership role, but the sooner you can start thinking about yourself as a leader, you can start practicing. And you can start realizing that leadership practice exists in every single interaction that you have with every human being. Do you want to make a micro deposit or a micro withdrawal? Do you want to own your mistakes so a micro or a macro withdrawal can be reduced? Or do you want to experiment with losing trust and faith in the people that may be in your family or relationships or business? It is amazing to me. In every room that I've ever publicly spoken, the first question I ask is to people in the room. I say, listen, how many of you in this room, and I'm not asking if you're in a leadership position, how many of you consider yourself to be a leader? I have never had every single person in the room raise their hand. And that is a problem. It's a fixable problem, though. If you don't think of yourself as a leader, you're not going to act as a leader. You may get away with it for a little bit of time, but if I push that timeline out long enough, you are going to fail. And just like all the things that I have been able to accomplish in my life, I was able to do so with practice and reps and experience. Leadership is exactly the same way. And I actually use a driver's license analogy when I talk about leadership. I'll canvass the room again. How many of you, when you were 16, never learned how to drive a car and just went up to the window at the DMV and said, I am here and I am a game time player. I'm ready to go. And nobody ever raises their hand, which is unfortunate because I would love to actually talk about the headspace of that person. But the reason they don't is simple. They didn't know how to drive. Leadership is a professional license, just like a driver's license. And you can be taught and mentored, and you have the rest of your life to refine that. So on the tail end, again, you are not alone, regardless of what you are going through. On the front end, the earlier that you can recognize that you are a leader, the sooner you can start acting like it.
Wow. I live in similar spaces today. How we both got there, very different. I'm impacting organizations. I had shared with you keynote prior to this, 2-hour training before that, and all of it is about leadership. And I define leadership as self-leadership. People want to become a leader. So I've got a group of people who have been selected by their company for potential elevation. So they go through this program, and at the end of it, they're going to be a better leader. They can communicate better, so on and so forth. And they're all doing it because they want to get the title. And I love that your example is showing everybody that we're a leader right up front. And I set the foundation that leadership is truly self-leadership. It's how do you lead yourself? Why I admire you and what you've achieved is not because it's cool or because of the things you've done, but because of how seriously you take yourself. I could say the same for Tiger Woods putting 100 putts at 10 feet, then 100 at 11 feet, 100 at 12 feet, and just continuing and starting all over from zero when he misses one. And like that's taking himself seriously. And that is a tremendous skill set. You've spoken throughout the entire episode today about consistency. And leadership is about showing up consistently and demonstrating by example. We can tell people all day long, but when we show them, it's more effective. And it's showing up for yourself because it's who you are, how you show up, and how you lead yourself. And that is when people start to follow you. Again, I'm going to blow some smoke up your butt and say it's why your book went to freaking New York Times bestseller, because it's truth. People can see that you're not just speaking into, oh, here's a cool story or here's a great way to be, but it's tangible, tactical things that we can apply into our lives. I know our episode's coming to a close, but I want to one more time just say to you, like, hand to heart, man, I am so proud of you as a man. I'm proud of who you are and how you're showing up. I say that because I am a man who speaks to some of the most powerful, influential people in the world, billionaires, 100 millionaires, people that are doing really big things in the world. And behind closed doors, so many of them burst into tears, tell me they're scared, tell me they're alone, tell me they're sad, tell me they're suicidal, and they think they're the only one, and they don't have anybody to confide in. And what I love is that you have come onto the show and you are use your terminology now, the ideal specimen of what is a man supposed to look like. I interviewed a gentleman on the podcast who also very similar background to yours, Johanse Bolden. And he, again, lived everything that told him Rocky Balboa going in, face painted, he's a man. And so he did everything to become the man. And yet, he was alone at a fire with a 9mm and a bottle of booze. Yeah. And I think that when you speak into honestly, candidly, openly, as one of the manliest men there is, somebody who has achieved everything that says you should be respected, accepted as a tough guy, and then you say that you've struggled with suicidal ideation, that people struggle with it, that it is, I don't want to say normal, but when we look at the statistics of the number of men that are committing suicide right now, and it is growing, and it is now increasing that children are now going through this, that I just think you give so much permission to people to say like, hey man, you can have a thought, but the thought doesn't define you, but how you're going to show up next is going to. There isn't a question there. It's more of just I want to take this moment to just say thank you for being you. Thank you for showing up the way that you do and for giving everyone permission. But I want to speak specifically to the men who think they need to be a certain way to be a man. And I think how you show up today is arguably the manliest thing that you've ever done.
People can define strength in different ways if they want to. The people that I respect the most from my old career, the ones who I would consider to be the strongest and the single most powerful example I have seen of strength, is when they realized they couldn't do it alone and they asked for help. I mean, all the things that you mentioned that I've done in my life. I mean, I might be in this picture by myself, but I didn't take that picture. I was with somebody. I did it as a team. I did it as part of a team. I always had people that I knew that I could fall back on and ask for help. I've had those conversations with those same people who from the outside, they would be viewed as if they have everything. And then you talk to them and they describe it as if they have nothing. It's the craziest dichotomy that I've ever seen. And nobody would believe it unless you've been in those rooms and you've seen it. There's more to life than the things. I think it's the people that you go through life with.
There is a conversation that came to mind of a gentleman, and I won't give specifics, but exited a company, hundreds of millions of dollars in his bank account, and the very next day wakes up and wants to kill himself because he's like, who am I? And that's why when I started this conversation with you today, I wanted to ask you, at 11 years old, you decide this is who I want to be. And at 12, you committed, 13, still committed. You become the best in the world at it. You achieve tremendous success in what you committed to doing. And that is who you are. That's how you defined yourself, every action, everything that you did. And then you'd have to be somebody else. And that's where people struggle, is how do you shift? And what I love is that everything that you've done, if people go back and re-listen to it now, having heard all this, and they could see that it's just how you've shown up in every moment. It's all the same practices and principles that you just repeat in different settings. And you control the thing that you can control in this moment. I would love to ask one final question. And then I would love for you to also, in addition to the question, tell everyone where we can find you. I'm going to add, obviously, your show notes, your book link, all into my show notes, your website, etc., your Instagram handle. But I would love to know, where can people find you and how can people work with you or explore opportunities to work with you if that is something that they choose. But my final question for you is, I love to ask people, because I believe that we're connected to this incredible benevolent force and it's flowing to us and through us at all times. And every experience that we have in life is preparing us for who we get to become. It was never about you becoming a SEAL Team 6 leader. It was about you turning around, teaching it, sharing it, and impacting people, sitting in boardrooms at home, stuck in traffic. And every one of these micro moments is going to change someone's perspective, and that changes their life, and it changes how they think, it changes how they feel. But I believe that we're connected to this divinity, this intelligence. And I love to ask people on the podcast that if you could take a moment right now, just take a deep breath and then lean into what do you feel is something that this audience needs to hear from you right now that you're most qualified to answer. Take a moment and respond with whatever comes to you.
The outward perception of what people probably think I am or who I am versus my internal monologue would probably shock them. I'm not saying I have a PhD in negative self-talk, maybe a bachelor's, working on my master's perhaps. But I have always, and I think will always, view myself as an exceptionally average person. I have no more than a high school diploma, and I barely graduated high school, not because of aptitude. I just purely wasn't interested. And honestly, I would have rather been at the gym preparing to go into the Navy. It was a matter of just lack of paying attention because I didn't care at the time. But I wake up every morning wondering whether or not I am good enough or equipped enough to accomplish even the things that I want to do in my life. I'm not a millionaire. I'm not a hundreds of million. I don't have a business that I'm going to exit. It's going to throw a bunch of zeros associated with the net worth to my name. And it would be easy to view some of the things that I've accomplished and think it's the exact opposite of that. But that's not the case. I am an exceptionally average person. And most people that I have met that are exceptionally accomplished are exactly the same. You will have a black swan event, or there'll be an Elon Musk, to use a monetary example of that. But that doesn't scale. And I don't think it serves people well to use those examples as what they think or expect their life is going to be like. It's okay to feel like you're not good enough. It's okay to question whether or not you have the skills, the knowledge, the expertise to be able to accomplish what it is you're trying to accomplish, because everybody else around you is feeling exactly the same way. You don't have to be exceptional to accomplish exceptional things. The recipe for my life is exactly that, because I am not exceptional. But I've been around successful people, and I've been around exceptional people, and I've worked my way into those teams, not because of some innate ability that they didn't have. It was my ability to work really, really hard. That's probably the only core skill that I have, is the ability to grind. And that can be practiced as well too. So hopefully that answers that question for you. For me, finding me is actually super simple. Somebody years ago said, hey, you need to have a website that has a portal for everything that you do. And I said, that sounds like a good idea. What should I use as the name? And they said, I don't know. How about yourname.com? And I said, that's a great idea. So andystumpf.com is going to have everything that I do. It links to my podcast. It has the speaking stuff. It has the leadership engagement. It's all right there. You can buy the book there if you want to. So andystumpf.com is the one-stop shop, if you will, to figure out where I am slowly stumbling my way through to life next.
I love everything that you said today. Every single word. I resonate so deeply and profoundly with who you are as a human being. And I believe that, as I've repeatedly said, our life is preparing us for who we get to become. And you are meeting that calling. You've given so many people so much permission today to approach life a little bit differently. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for having the courage to not only serve our country. I want to thank you for putting yourself in harm's way. I want to thank you for teaching people what does real strength and humility look like. What does it look like to take action every day? What does it look like to be consistent? What does it look like to lead by example and to stay humble along the process? But most, I want to thank you for reminding our audience that we're ordinary people, but we have the choice to live extraordinary lives. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us on the Empowered Life podcast today. Thank you, brother.
My pleasure.
To our audience, I want to, one more time, thank you for investing your time in this conversation today. And if something in this really impacted you, I would love for you to reach out to Andy, send him a message and tell him what it is, because it takes a tremendous amount of courage to put yourself out there, to write a book, to put one foot in front of the other. And when somebody can turn around and say, man, I needed to hear that today, and I just want to say thank you to you, it's the greatest gift. We don't count dollars. We really count these moments. And right now, I have no doubt you've had a moment, and I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. From my heart to yours, I love you. Have an amazing rest of your day and go out and be extraordinary. If this episode gave you clarity, peace, or a perspective shift, hold on to that. And here is how you lock it in. Subscribe so that you keep building momentum week after week. And if you're the kind of person that believes a good message should travel, please leave a review. Reviews aren't just ratings. They're signals that help this reach the people who are ready for it. And then share this episode with somebody you love, someone you lead, or somebody that you were rooting for. Links are in the show notes so that you can connect with me online and on Instagram. Now go out there and take one beautiful, bold, and aligned step and make it count. I'm going to catch you on the next episode of the Empowered Life Podcast.